Throughout recorded history, the moon has accompanied our world as the closest celestial body in space and is perhaps the most studied. Yet despite all our efforts, it remains filled with unresolved mysteries. Science has still not fully explained how the moon was formed. Not only that, but elements like its unusual orbit, distance from us, density, and structure also continue to hold their secrets. While we have uncovered some scientific details in the Great Moon Puzzle, a large part of it remains unsolved. Interestingly, there is one scientific theory that attempts to answer these unresolved mysteries about the moon. I'm not talking about a conspiracy theory. This theory was actually developed by scientists. It suggests that the moon is a hollow, artificial celestial body brought to Earth by someone. I know it sounds crazy, but let's dive deeper into it together. You probably think that the moon has always been a celestial body accompanying Earth since time immemorial, right? However, there are some contradictions regarding this. Science has yet to find definitive proof of how the moon actually formed. Here are some of the leading theories on the subject. The first theory suggests that the moon was somehow captured by Earth's gravitational field while drifting through space and settled into orbit. However, the issue with this theory is that it's mathematically and physically nearly impossible. Another theory is the accretion theory. According to this, both the Earth and the moon formed within the same cloud of dust as the solar system was forming. But this theory has a significant problem as well. If the moon had formed in the same way as Earth, it would need to have an iron core and a defined axis. However, the moon has neither a core nor an axis. Another once popular theory is the Fission hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that the Earth was spinning so rapidly at one point that a massive chunk of rock broke off from the region where the Pacific Ocean is now, forming the moon in orbit. Though it may sound far-fetched, scientists investigated this hypothesis and discovered that moon rocks are much older than the rocks found on the ocean floor. The most widely accepted theory today is the giant impact hypothesis. According to this theory, a Mars-sized celestial body collided with Earth billions of years ago, causing both bodies to melt. The debris from Earth then coalesced in orbit and cooled down, eventually forming the moon. However, the chances of such a collision occurring so perfectly are astronomically low. In light of all this information, one might think that missions to the moon and the collection of lunar materials have solved this mystery. But on the contrary, after these missions, things have become far more complex than anyone could have ever imagined. Since the first manned mission to the moon in 1969, the rock samples collected from the lunar surface have been quite extraordinary. Normally on planets, the layers closer to the surface are younger, and the deeper you go, the older the rocks you find. However, the opposite is true on the moon. The surface dust is older than the rocks beneath it, and the rocks on top of the dust are even older than all the layers below them. This is the exact opposite of what we see on Earth or any naturally formed planetary body. The only logical and scientifically plausible explanation for this phenomenon is that, much like a mining site on Earth, the interior of the moon may have been hollowed out. The anomalies don't stop there. Normally, as you move toward the core of a planet, the density increases while it decreases as you approach the surface. However, on the moon, this pattern is also reversed. So far, no scientific study has been able to explain the cause of this extraordinary phenomenon. The moon's surface is covered in craters formed by thousands of meteor impacts over billions of years. Given this long timeline, you would expect the rocks surrounding these craters to vary in age, right? Yet most of the samples collected from the moon show that these rocks are all from similar time periods. That's not all. The chemical composition of these rocks is quite different from the lunar dust surrounding them, and despite the fact that the moon has no magnetic field of its own, these rocks are highly magnetic. It's estimated that our Earth is about 4.6 billion years old, and current theories suggest that the moon is roughly the same age. However, the rocks on the moon are much older than those on Earth, dating back to almost the time when the solar system first formed. The peculiarities don't end there. Research has found traces of uranium-236 and neptunium-237 on the lunar surface. This is not normal, as these two radioactive materials do not occur naturally. The only reason we see them on Earth is because we have created them ourselves. Furthermore, elements like titanium, chromium, and zirconium, which are relatively rare on Earth, are found in high concentrations on the Moon. This raises the question, if Earth and the Moon formed at the same time from the same cloud of dust, why do they have such vastly different elemental compositions? Another intriguing aspect of these materials is that they are extremely durable and resistant to erosion. On Earth, we typically use such materials to reinforce structures. Keep these structure-reinforcing materials in mind, because things are about to get even more interesting. When scientists examined thousands of craters on the Moon, they discovered that most of them are nearly the same depth, regardless of their size. This is counterintuitive. Typically, the larger the crater, the greater the impact force, and thus, the deeper the crater should be. However, it seems as if there's some kind of layer beneath the Moon's surface that prevents meteors from penetrating beyond a certain depth. It's as though there's an underlying structure stopping them. It's important to note that these findings and theories weren't formulated by conspiracy theorists, but by international scientists after years of extensive research. And soon, things become even more perplexing. You might be thinking to yourself, well, in that case, we could place seismic measurement devices on the Moon, or intentionally crash objects into it to learn from the vibrations whether the inside of the Moon is hollow. That shouldn't be too hard. And you'd be right. Scientists at NASA also considered this question, and as you might guess, they conducted an experiment. So what did they find? After the Apollo 12 crew placed the seismic sensors I mentioned earlier on the Moon and completed their mission, they left the surface in their module to rejoin the main spacecraft. They then deliberately crashed the lunar module into the Moon's surface at high speed, triggering a geological event that surprised the scientists at NASA. The Moon began to resonate seismically, much like a bell, and this resonance didn't just last for a brief moment. It continued for almost an hour. Just think about it. The impact of a 5-person lunar module on the Moon caused it to ring for nearly an hour. Intrigued by this, the experts prepared an even heavier and denser object to crash into the Moon during the Apollo 13 mission. This time, the Moon continued to resonate for 3 hours, and the vibrations reached 22 miles, 35 kilometers below the surface. For comparison, a similar impact on Earth would cause vibrations lasting only a few minutes, and these would gradually slow and fade as they moved deeper into the Earth's denser layers. On the Moon, however, these vibrations actually accelerated at a depth of about 37 miles, 60 kilometers. This suggests that the deeper you go, the less dense the Moon becomes, possibly indicating massive hollow areas in certain parts. Supporting this is the fact that, despite the Moon being about 25% the size of Earth, its density is only 1% that of Earth's. If you logically interpret these numbers, it leads to the conclusion that the Moon's interior might be a hollow shell. But it's not just a matter of density. There are many unnatural contradictions surrounding the Moon. The Moon, in terms of size, resembles more of a planet than a satellite. No other moon in the solar system is this large in comparison to its orbiting planet. Additionally, it is much closer to its planet than a typical satellite would be, and it is the only object in the solar system with a nearly perfect circular orbit. The distance from Earth to the Sun is exactly 400 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Interestingly, the Sun's diameter is precisely 400 times that of the Moon. This ratio is why, during solar eclipses, the Moon perfectly covers the Sun in the sky. Because of this perfect alignment of orbit distance and size difference, the Moon appears to be the same size as the much larger Sun, and this is the sole reason solar eclipses are so perfectly aligned year after year. You could chalk all of this up to coincidence, but when dozens of coincidences begin to pile up, one might start considering things with a more open mind. That's exactly what happened in 1970. 2 Soviet scientists reviewed all the available data and arrived at the only logical conclusion. According to their scientific explanation, one that they admitted sounded crazy, the Moon is not only hollow, but also an ancient spacecraft that arrived here a very long time ago. So this raises the obvious question, who built the Moon? You can find numerous writings, studies, stories, and poems about the Moon in ancient history. However, if you dig deeper into the texts of ancient civilizations, you will find less information about the moon. And the further back you go, you come across stories describing a sky without the moon. In ancient Roman and Greek writings from the 5th century BCE, there is mention of a people known as the Proselenes. This mysterious group, who lived in the region of Arcadia, claimed that they had lived on Earth before there was a moon in the sky. On the other side of the world, the ancient Tiahuanaco people of Bolivia wrote of times when there was no moon. According to their records, the moon arrived around 13,000 years ago. For those familiar with ancient history, this date is significant. It coincides with the time thought to be the era of the Great Flood. Looking at Africa, Zulu legends claim that the moon is hollow and that gods live inside it. According to the legend, 2 divine brothers placed the moon in the sky. These 2 brothers are none other than Enki and Enlil, the famous Anunnaki, whom the Sumerians worshipped as gods and considered the creators of humanity. According to the Zulu, the Earth's climate was different before the moon arrived. There were no seasons, and the planet was covered by a thick layer of clouds. It seems as if the Zulus had knowledge of certain mysteries that science has only unraveled in the past few centuries. Without the moon's gravitational pull, the Earth would have an unstable, wobbling axis, and due to constantly shifting and unstable climate cycles, the planet would be far from habitable. According to Zulu legends, when the moon arrived, the clouds that covered the Earth began to fall as rain, and the planet was struck by a great flood. This ancient African culture, which appears to have been aware of scientific truths we've only recently uncovered, shows that science still has much to learn from mythology and history. Now, when we combine all the scientific, historical, and mythological data and coincidences, it seems to point toward the conclusion that the moon is hollow and artificial. But let's push the boundaries a bit further and see what modern developments can teach us. Fortunately, the evidence is right in front of us. Science books tell us that the moon is cold, dead, and without an atmosphere. Its core is inactive, and it has shown no seismic activity for millions of years. You learn science and facts in school, but the scientific data discussed here goes beyond the textbooks. These discoveries were made by scientists themselves, but they haven't been particularly eager to share this information. With the rise of individual observation technologies and the expansion of science beyond the control of a few nations, new data about the moon is emerging that we've never seen before. And this data shows us that what's happening up there may not be as dead and inactive as we've been told. Let's take a closer look at some of these findings. On March 7, 1971, a water vapor cloud covering an area of approximately 70 square miles, 180 square kilometers, was detected over the moon's Plato crater. Yes, an atmospheric phenomenon occurred on the moon, a satellite with no atmosphere, for a span of 14 hours. This event has not only been observed recently, but has also been witnessed multiple times over the past century by 6 different astronomers from various locations. Additionally, tracks of rolling rocks are often found on the moon's surface. While this is intriguing on its own, detailed studies have documented that some of these rocks have rolled uphill and even over obstacles, continuing to move forward, a fact that has been recorded in geological observations. Since Aristotle's time, dozens of astronomers, both amateur and professional, have reported seeing glowing lights on the moon's surface through their observational equipment. Even NASA's historical archives contain records noting flash-like illuminations on the moon between 1540 and 1976. This phenomenon persists to this day. In 1992, images of the Aristarchus crater revealed a glowing effect that scientists referred to as the blue jewel. This event has periodically repeated itself up to the present day. With the advanced tools we now have, we are detecting such fascinating phenomena like the water vapor and glowing lights across various locations on the moon. These occurrences now have an official name: transient lunar phenomena, TLP. Is that all? Of course not. In addition to these strange occurrences, there are dozens of structures that can be classified as artificial, detected by telescopes, satellites, and even astronauts who visited the moon. These include tower-like structures several miles high, pyramids, and other symmetrical formations. The larger mystery, however, is why we haven't returned to the moon. despite such strange discoveries happening right in our cosmic backyard. Meet Sergeant Carl Wolf, who worked as a technician in the U.S. Air Force. He was part of a team responsible for processing images from satellites that observed the moon. Over the years, Wolf claimed that his team identified dozens of structures classified as artificial in satellite photos of the moon, but these were never shared with the public by NASA. Wolf is not someone who abandoned his profession to become a UFO enthusiast. He is a satellite technician who continued his professional career. It's not just Carl Wolf. Take a look at the press conference that the Apollo 11 crew held after returning to Earth. Normally, you'd expect the heroes of such a monumental event to be excited, right?
Yeah.
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade.
But in the footage, they appear unusually sad and even depressed. You might say, you're exaggerating. It's normal. But here's something to consider. When the Apollo 11 crew returned to Earth, they were forced to sign an extremely strict agreement, preventing them from making any comments beyond the prepared statements. They were even warned that leaking any information would result in charges of treason. Don't you think such strict measures for a space mission seem a bit excessive? When it comes to the scientific responses to these claims, modern science still doesn't have a definitive explanation for the moon's formation. The most widely accepted theory suggests that the moon was formed from older, denser material that broke off from Earth after a collision with a celestial body. However, this impact theory still has gaps and doesn't fully satisfy as a scientific explanation, especially considering that some moon rocks have been found to be even older than rocks on Earth. The claim that the moon rings or vibrates after impacts is explained by suggesting that the rocks in the moon's layers are less dense, but this is also an inadequate explanation. This reasoning doesn't fully address why the moon, despite being so large, has only 1% of Earth's density, nor does it explain why vibrations seem to speed up as you go deeper into the moon. The gaps in these explanations make the scientific consensus on the moon's origin feel less conclusive. NASA explains that the structures observed on the moon are optical illusions, and that the flashes seen are caused by stones that temporarily melted and solidified due to earlier meteor impacts. This may sound like a reasonable explanation, but there's still no official information regarding the intermittent atmospheric vaporization that has been observed. Additionally, the theory that the moon appeared in the sky 13,000 years ago doesn't seem plausible to me, as Earth has supported life quite well for millions of years. Geological research shows that climate patterns have been relatively stable for hundreds of millions of years, making the moon's presence during those times a much more likely scenario. However, we truly don't know what happened 13,000 years ago. What we do know is that many ancient civilizations speak of a massive natural disaster or flood during that period. Overall, there are numerous extraordinary events that science has proven but cannot fully explain, coming from a variety of sources. Will these phenomena be scientifically explained over time, or will we discover that the moon is truly hollow and mechanical in nature? Only time will tell. One thing is certain: NASA and similar institutions are not sharing even 1% of what they know with the public. That's why, no matter how outlandish a theory might seem, it's worth keeping an open mind if there's scientific and historical data to support it. For more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Take care. Don't forget to subscribe.